this relocation is good for them, to notice the analogy to let them eat cake.
Yeah, right, exactly. I was going to say that.
So, hey,
thing.
maybe another one of those metadata layers is going to be this rebellion we keep picking up.
Let's take it a step further now. In pre-9/11, FEMA came out with a statement that said three major events, if they happen, would put the United States down on its knees. One was a terrorist act in New York City. The second was a devastating hurricane at New Orleans. And the third was a major earthquake, and I think they specifically said San Francisco, but Clif, it could be anywhere. I mean, Southern California would have the same result.
Or Pacific Northwest, or New Madrid, it wouldn't make much difference, right?
Yeah, but they did say San Francisco, like maybe they have some inside information. I'm not sure.
Or maybe they're just having a psychic leak day.
Well,
you know, you give them 1 out of 3. Hey, that's a psychic leak.
Yeah.
2 out of 3. Boy, that's a really good psychic leak.
Yeah, but how about 3 out of 3?
3 out of 3?
Scary. Too scary, because have you, in any of your runs, been able to pick up any reference or information on the manipulation of weather?
Sure, we get it all the time. The question is it meaningful?
Do. Wow. Can you share with us what you have found?
Nothing that you couldn't find just by going and reading the same kind of articles discussing it at the conscious level. Let's imagine that we're in a giant stream of information, and the stuff in the middle of the stream, which we'll call the mainstream, is relatively sanitized, if you will, for the general consumption. The really interesting stuff happens out at the fringe. Unfortunately, at some point within the fringe level stuff, you cross a layer whereby the conscious interpretation of it matches the subconscious, so you kind of have to discard it.
Oh.
Make sense? The sample size is so small relative to the overall population size that the word screening effects you get are minimized.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're picking up some of it. There's a fair amount of discussion. It's growing. It's nascent. It's not particularly overwhelming, and it's not particularly, from our viewpoint, illustrative of anything, because we just keep coming back to having to delve down into the detail, and that's, again, where we get back to the conscious mind, and we have a tendency to sort of discard that. Okay.
What about the fact, and I think you came up, quite some time ago, about the possibility of an event against Bush?
No, it isn't quite that way, okay? We've got to be, again, sort of seriously clear about it.
Yeah.
It's a period of time in which will be flavored by the idea of a wounding or something along those lines, right? But it doesn't necessarily, I mean, that could be emotional. I mean, certainly you'd have to say that he's in a period of time right at the moment where he's emotionally wounded.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so we've got to be very careful about our interpretation, because we keep coming up with the emotional words rather than, as people are demanding from us all the time, a physical description.
Yeah, yeah.
And we get some physical descriptions that turn out to be amazingly accurate when they pop up. For instance, I think over on George's site, you can find some of the historical references to the stuff we did with the snipers. Everybody's running around saying, you know, lone nut job white guy in a white van, and we kept saying, even at that time, well, at the risk of sounding contrarian, no, you're wrong. It's two people. They have an Islamic association. They have a military association. Blah 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 blah.
And they were black, I think you said.
Correct. And they each had this relationship to each other because we were picking up this emotional component of it all.
Clif, how the hell did you... I mean, that to me, because all, as you said, the police, the news services and everything else came up with the description of a disgruntled white guy. I think he was in his 40s or blah, blah. But you came up with an exact description of...
We came up with a more meaningful one. Let's leave the word exact out of any description of our work.
My gosh, man. I mean, but that truly is astounding.
It was a good one. I was pleased with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially since we actually had a very good physical description of what turned out to be the guy's insignia from the military. Now, it was George Ure that put those two together. All I did was come up with a description of the insignia, the globe, and all this other stuff.
Jeez. My gosh.
Psychic leakage, right? Where was it coming
Well,
from?
I guess so. I mean, if that was a leakage, it was more like a flood.
We've had a couple of those, and like we kept getting this thing for a terrible marine disaster. You know, ships at sea didn't know how to interpret this. Terrible.
Yeah.
And of course, it was the Columbia space shuttle disaster, because Columbia, the gem of the ocean.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And you go back later and then look at
Jeez.
the description, and it's like, you know, it's
Yeah.
makes the skin crawl a bit. Yeah.
Well, it's like, you know, hindsight's always 20/20. But geez, if we could only be able to interpret the information you come up with, let's say pre-event, if you could get people that would listen to you, we could probably stop a lot of very, very terrible things, or maybe natural disasters too.
It may be possible. I don't know. That goes to the nature of time, and that then you get into some really strange speculation. And I would invite everybody to read Daniel Dennett's discussion of consciousness before they get too far into speculating about the nature of time.
Jeez. Clif, in your runs, and I think more on a personal level for you, and definitely for me, because you and I both have such a tie into and a great interest into the spiritual aspect. What comes out of the different runs that you do, and let's say dealing in the spiritual aspect of humanity?
Well, the kind of weirdnesses we get are apparently showing up in what we're labeling as our metadata layer. It may be that you could use language in a method like this to actually validate that we are all operating under certain influences that appear to change. Now, where they're coming from and why and so on is an honest spiritual kind of a discussion, right? Mm-hmm. Where do these waves come from? Why do we all respond to them the way we do?
Yeah.
We're obviously all vibrations in and of ourselves, and so it makes sense that we respond to vibrations, light, sound, all the others.
Sure.
And so it also makes sense that we would respond to emotional vibrations that might be coming from someplace. And within that whole context, we get a huge, very rich layer of subject matter that we don't really usually report on. But some things that we notice coming out of there, for instance, is that we're very definitely encountering a substantial shift that when applied, what we're going to do is we're going to step outside of our work for a second and say that what we're going to do is we're going to apply two terms here that we're taking from astrology or astronomy. And we're going to apply the term Piscean and Aquarian at super huge levels of metadata, for instance. And so the Piscean age was the age of the rise of the Bible-based religions, Judeo-Christian and Mohammedanism. During this period of time, we shed an old concept, which was the ram, or we'd come out of Aries and we were into a whole new world, which basically went towards control systems. Schooling behavior is how we think of it.
Okay.
Fish school, and regardless of whether it's controlled by an individual or so on, it really makes no difference. Now we appear to be going into a larger period of time, or shifting out of that into a period of time in which we can say that it appears that we're going to go towards less central authority, less control, more self-organizing cooperatives, and a whole different tone, if you will, than we found in the last few thousand years. And that this, coincidentally, is Aquarian-based in the sense that in the precession we've shifted over into the age of Aquarius now in a real seriousness. And apparently there's also a shift in consciousness underway.
Can you define how that is and how it's going to affect everything?
I can give you certain emotional pointers to how we'll feel about things, but how we're going to interpret that and react to it is anybody's guess. For instance, those people that are doing badly with the militancy issues are having a real hard time with the militancy thing and are doing their militancy stuff badly because they're probably not really aware that there's this giant militancy thing going on. So once we become aware that we're into this shift, we may decide to harmonize with these values and actually accelerate things. or we may not. There may be a big backlash to it. I can't predict how people will react that way. But what we can say is that the principles of organization of human behavior has crossed a threshold and is changing as we speak.
Okay. Do you think that is the indicative phrase of humanity's consciousness possibly switching over from the Piscean age to the age of Aquarius?
There certainly is a whole lot of that going on, yes. And it appears that we're going to encounter all kinds of growth, which of course means stress.
Yes, of course.
And reaction to the stress and all of that. Mm-hmm. So, it's not necessarily a bleak forecast because of the nature of the language, right, but also it's not a birth without pain.
Yeah, but see, what people don't understand, I guess, is that anytime you have a period of growth, something has to break down and give way.
Correct.
So even though it would appear at the time to be a very negative experience, in reality it's not, because it's the only way that anything, whether it's a tree, whether it's a flower, whether it's a vegetable, whether it's a human being, in order to grow, and especially grow on a spiritual level, something has to break down in order for that individual or that aspect of them has to expand.
Yeah. And it's quite true. And perhaps I could get you to hold that thought for a minute while I rush on over and tweak a machine and get right back.
You betcha. Go ahead.
I'm doing some processing for our next part here, so I've got to attend to this.
I think you did this last time, too. Okay.
Literally a minute and a half or so.
Go ahead, everybody. Yes, Clif, go ahead. And everybody,
okay.
We are going to, Clif Webbot will be back in just a moment, but my, we are getting into some things, some concepts, some information that I think, as I have said before, if we utilize what Clif is sharing with us, I think what it's offering us is an opportunity to prepare, prepare physically, prepare mentally, prepare emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. Look at some of the events that Clif has discovered in the different WebBot runs. And before we run out of time, because we only have about 29 minutes left. 19 minutes left. Wow, this has gone fast. We have to know, I hope, what are some of the most important aspects that Clif is picking up in the present WebBot run. This is the fifth, I forget what he calls them, cycle or whatever it is, but this is going on right now. And he just finished, I think, run 5 and is going into run 6. So I sit back and I see what he is doing. I don't pretend to understand it.
Yeah, my apologies for that.
That's okay. That's okay.
It did bring up something, though, along these same lines.
Okay.
Curiously, one of those far-out fringe areas, I'm in a room over there with an open skylight. Happen to hear another one of those chemtrail jets going over.
Really?
Yeah, they're spraying rather heavily up here the last few days.
See, we had it last week.
Yeah, and it's an odd use of kerosene. They don't even bother to deny that they're doing it. It's never addressed anywhere, so it pops up into anybody's mainstream news. But
wow.
I can't think of a better example of Piscean kind of behavior, of this layer that we're shifting out of. Now, part of the thing we're picking up arose maybe 1999. First started seeing the appearance of the concept of a singularity.
Mm-hmm.
Since then,